In May of 2023, in the ruins of what was once the Wonderworld Amusement Park in Cedar Falls, Iowa, a caretaker named Christopher Jones was supervising the final demolition of abandoned structures when his excavator struck something that shouldn't have been there. What he discovered buried beneath decades of earth and oblivion would forever change the life of a family that had spent 33 entire years without answers. For more than 3 decades, Richard and Margaret Thompson lived with a question that corroded their souls day after day. What had happened to their 8-year-old twin daughters on that seemingly perfect summer day in 1990? For 33 years, they looked at every child on the street, wondering if it could be one of their girls. For 33 years, they kept the twins' rooms exactly as they were on the day they disappeared. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss our upcoming cases. Today we're going to unravel one of the most disturbing disappearances in American amusement park history, a mystery that remained unsolved until demolition machines revealed the truth everyone was looking for. This is the story of 2 inseparable sisters who disappeared amidst crowds of happy families, of an investigation that mobilized the FBI for years, and of how sometimes the most devastating answers are hidden exactly where we least expect to find them. Prepare to learn all the details of a discovery that brought closure after more than 3 decades of agony. Sarah Thompson and Emily Rodriguez were identical 8-year-old twins who, ironically, couldn't be more different in personality if they were sisters from completely different families. Born on September 15, 1981, they shared the same wavy blonde hair that shone golden under the sun, the same crystal blue eyes that reflected infinite curiosity, and the same small height for their age, only 1 meter and 20 centimeters, which made people always confuse one with the other. But anyone who spent more than 5 minutes with the Thompson twins quickly learned to distinguish them. Sarah was the natural leader, the brave girl who always spoke first, who climbed the tallest trees in the backyard, and who convinced Emily to participate in her most audacious adventures. Her hair was always slightly disheveled because she couldn't stay still long enough for her mother to comb it properly, and she had a small scar on her chin from a bicycle fall at 6 years old. Emily, on the other hand, was the gentle and contemplative soul of the duo. She preferred drawing flowers in her notebook to climbing fences, loved helping her mother in the kitchen preparing cookies, and had a special way with animals that made even the most skittish dogs approach her with confidence. Emily always kept her hair carefully tied with colorful ribbons. Blue was her favorite color, and had the habit of whispering secrets in Sarah's ear when she thought no one was looking. The girls lived with their parents, Richard Thompson, a 34-year-old mechanic who had worked at the family shop for 15 years, and Margaret Thompson, a 32-year-old elementary school teacher known for her infinite patience and warm smiles. The family lived in a 2-story house with a porch on Maple Street in Cedar Falls, a city of 35,000 inhabitants where everyone knew everyone and children could still play in the streets until dark without parents worrying. Richard Thompson had adopted Emily when he married Margaret in 1979. Emily's biological mother, Carmen Rodriguez, had died in a car accident when Emily was only 6 months old, and Margaret, who was her best friend, took custody of the baby without hesitation. When Margaret became pregnant with Sarah 2 years later, the doctor explained that the girls would technically be half-sisters, but for all practical purposes, they were twins in spirit, if not in genetics. They were 2 halves of a single soul, Margaret used to tell friends. Sarah gave Emily courage to explore the world, and Emily gave Sarah sensitivity to appreciate the beauty around her. One was never complete without the other. Indeed, the girls were rarely seen apart. At school, they insisted on sitting side by side. At home, they shared not only a room, but also a bed, even though they had separate beds available. The twins attended Cedar Falls Elementary School, where they were known for being exemplary students with complementary personalities. Sarah excelled in physical education and science, always asking questions that challenged their teachers. Emily shone in art and reading, creating intricate drawings that adorned the classroom walls and reading books far beyond her grade level. Mrs. Linda Davis, the girls' third-grade teacher, specifically remembered an incident that perfectly illustrated the nature of their relationship. During a recess in April 1990, Sarah had convinced Emily to try using the playground equipment meant for older children. Emily was clearly nervous, but trusted Sarah so much that she agreed to the adventure. When Emily slipped and hurt her knee, Sarah not only consoled her, but also took full responsibility for the incident, insisting that she had forced Emily to do something dangerous. In the Cedar Falls community, the Thompson twins were known for their enthusiastic participation in local activities. They were active members of the Junior Girl Scouts, where Sarah earned badges for outdoor activities while Emily excelled in craft projects. Every Sunday, the family attended First Methodist Church, where the girls sang in the children's choir. Sarah with her clear, strong voice, Emily with soft harmonies that perfectly complemented her sister. What made the twins even more special was their secret language. From a very young age, they had developed their own communication system that included gestures, facial expressions, and invented words that only they understood. Margaret often observed them talking silently, communicating complex thoughts with simple looks or subtle hand movements. Richard Thompson worked long hours at the mechanic shop to support the family, but always reserved special time for his daughters. Saturday mornings were dedicated to bicycle rides through the municipal park, where he taught Sarah about basic mechanics while Emily collected wildflowers for her collection. He was the type of father who actively participated in raising the girls, Margaret recalled years later. He was never a father who just came home and sat in front of the television. The twins had typical dreams of 8-year-old children, but with the special touch of their unique partnership. Sarah wanted to be an astronaut to explore distant planets, and Emily wanted to be an artist to draw all the beautiful things Sarah would find in space. They often played space missions in the backyard, with Sarah as commander and Emily as planetary beauty specialist, a position she had invented specifically for herself. It was this inseparable duo, these two girls who represented everything pure and good in the world, who woke up on the morning of July 14th, 1990, without knowing that would be the last day their families would see them smile. Sarah and Emily Thompson Rodriguez, 8 years old, were about to become the center of one of the most disturbing mysteries in American criminal history, a mystery that would take 33 years to finally be solved. The morning of July 14th, 1990, dawned with the kind of humid heat that only the American Midwest summer can provide. The temperature already marked 28 degrees Celsius at 8 o'clock in the morning, with forecasts to reach 35 degrees in the afternoon. Perfect weather for a day at Wonder World Amusement Park, the amusement park that had become Cedar Falls' main attraction since its inauguration in 1975. Sarah and Emily Thompson had woken up at 6:30 in the morning, long before the alarm clock rang. Such was their excitement about the trip that had been planned for 3 weeks. Margaret Thompson perfectly remembers the scene she found when she came down to the kitchen. The two girls were already dressed in their favorite jean shorts and matching t-shirts, pink for Sarah, blue for Emily, sitting at the kitchen table with Wonder World maps spread out in front of them, meticulously planning which rides they would visit first. "Mommy, we decided we're going to start with the carousel and bumper cars, then the Ferris wheel, and we're leaving the roller coaster for last because Sarah wants to end with adventure," Emily explained with the seriousness of a general planning a military campaign. Sarah nodded vigorously in agreement, her blonde hair bouncing with the movement. It was typical of the girls to turn any activity into an elaborate and carefully organized project. Richard Thompson had negotiated time off work specifically for this day. Wonderworld was too expensive for frequent visits on a working-class family budget, so this was a special occasion that had been saved for and planned for months. The girls had been talking about this day since April, Richard recalled years later. They had counted and recounted their allowance, money at least 50 times to make sure they could buy cotton candy and maybe a toy at the souvenir shop. The family left home at 9:15 in the morning in Richard's blue 1985 Ford station wagon, with the twins in the back seat singing children's songs and playing word games during the 40-minute drive to the park. Margaret had prepared a bag with snacks, sunscreen, and a disposable Kodak camera to document the special day. "I wanted to capture every moment," she said. "I knew it would be one of those days they would remember forever." Wonder World Amusement Park was particularly busy that Saturday in July. Since it was the middle of summer vacation and the weather was perfect, crowds of families from Iowa and neighboring states had the same idea. When the Thompsons arrived at the parking lot at 9:55 in the morning, there were already approximately 4,500 visitors in the park, nearly the maximum capacity of 5,000 people. The family passed through the entrance gates at 10:15 in the morning. Randy Morrison, the employee who served them at the ticket booth, specifically remembered the twins because they were practically vibrating with excitement, and Sarah had asked at least 3 times if they were sure all the attractions were working. "They were so polite and excited," Randy recalled, "the kind of kids that make you remember why you like working with families." During the first 3 hours, everything went exactly as the girls had planned. They started with the carousel, where Sarah chose a black horse and Emily a white horse, galloping side by side while Margaret took pictures. Next, they went to the bumper cars, where Sarah demonstrated her competitive nature trying to beat Emily, who laughed so hard she could barely drive her little car. At 12:30, the family took a break for lunch at the park's central food court. Margaret had brought sandwiches from home, but gave in to the EU girls' requests to share a giant portion of French fries and 2 glasses of iced lemonade. During lunch, they reviewed their list of attractions and decided they would try the smaller roller coaster, the Thunder Coaster, before heading to the Ferris wheel. It was at 1:45 in the afternoon that the family headed to the Thunder Coaster, located in the western section of the park. The line was particularly long due to the heat. Many families were looking for activities that offered some breeze, and the estimated wait was 35 minutes. Richard suggested that he and Margaret hold their place in line while the girls went to the nearby bathroom, which was approximately 50 meters from the attraction. "You go straight to the bathroom, don't talk to strangers, and come back here in no more than 10 minutes, Margaret instructed, with the loving firmness that characterized her parenting. Sarah held Emily's hand and responded with an emphatic, "Yes, Mommy," that reassured the parents. It was 1:52 in the afternoon when the 2 girls walked away into the crowd, Sarah 1 step ahead, as always, Emily firmly holding her sister's hand. The 10 minutes turned into 15. Then 20. At 2:15, Margaret began to feel that familiar anxiety that every mother recognizes when their children take longer than they should. "Maybe the bathroom line is really long," Richard tried to reassure, but his own eyes were already scanning the crowd, looking for two pairs of blonde hair. At 2:20, Richard left the line and walked to the nearest women's restroom. He asked two women to check if there were small girls inside. There weren't any. His heart began to race. He returned to Margaret, and together they began a more systematic search, visiting all the bathrooms in the area, checking lines for other nearby attractions, and asking employees if they had seen two identical blonde girls. At 2:35, only 43 minutes after seeing their daughters. For the last time, Margaret Thompson walked to the nearest security post with shaking legs and a tightness in her chest she had never felt before. "My daughters have disappeared," she told security officer Mark Stevens. 8-year-old twins, blonde hair, pink and blue t-shirts. They went to the bathroom and didn't come back. Wonderworld's security protocol for missing children was activated immediately. At 2:40, only 5 minutes after Margaret's initial report, discreet sirens began to sound throughout the park, a signal for all 127 employees to stop their activities and begin a coordinated search. The park was effectively placed in soft lockdown. No visitor could leave without having their identity verified and their vehicles inspected. Captain Robert Wilson, Wonderworld's head of security for 12 years, personally took command of the operation. With experience in 17 previous cases of lost children, all resolved in less than 2 hours. Wilson implemented a search plan that divided the park into 12 sectors, each under the responsibility of a specific team. The statistical probability is that they're lost somewhere in the park, Wilson explained to Richard and Margaret at 3 o'clock. "In my 12 years here, we've never had a real kidnapping case. Children get distracted, follow other family groups thinking they're their parents, or simply get lost in the crowd." His words were professional and reassuring, but Richard noticed that Wilson's hands were shaking slightly as he spoke. At 3:30, when the first hour of searches had not produced any sign of the twins, Wilson made the decision to contact local police. The Cedar Falls Police Department mobilized 4 units immediately, arriving at the park at 3:45. Detective Sergeant Linda Davis, a specialist in cases involving minors, took coordination of the police investigation. The first step was a detailed interview with Richard and Margaret Thompson. Detective Davis asked about possible family problems, disputed custody, or anyone who might have reasons to take the girls. The parents were clearly devastated, but were also completely cooperative, Davis recalled years later. There were no indications of domestic problems, or any reason to suspect family involvement. Simultaneously, teams of police officers began interviewing park employees, initially focusing on those who worked in the area near the bathrooms where the IKB girls were last seen. Timothy Chen, a 19-year-old operator who worked at a game booth 30 meters from the location, vaguely remembered seeing 2 blonde girls around 2 o'clock, but couldn't provide specific details due to the intense movement. At 4:45, 3 hours after the disappearance, the decision was made to completely close Wonderworld and evacuate all visitors. This was an extreme measure that would cost the park approximately $75,000 in lost revenue, but management considered it necessary to allow a complete and meticulous search of all facilities. The evacuation of 4,200 visitors was a tense and time-consuming process. Each family was briefly interviewed before being allowed to leave the park, and vehicles were inspected by police officers and sniffer dogs that had arrived from Des Moines. The process lasted until 7:30, almost 5 hours of intensive checks that produced no clue about the whereabouts of the Thompson twins. Meanwhile, specialized search teams scoured every square inch of Wonderworld. They checked all maintenance spaces, storage areas, administrative offices, and even ventilation ducts large enough to hide two small children. Divers from the county rescue team inspected the park's small artificial lake, although it was considered unlikely that the girls had drowned due to the constant presence of lifeguards. At 8 o'clock, when it became completely dark, reality began to set in for everyone involved in the search. The Thompson twins were not at Wonder World Amusement Park. Sometime between 1:52 and 2:35, two 8-year-old girls had simply vanished from a crowded amusement park with 4,500 people, without leaving a single trace. Margaret Thompson spent that first night in the local hospital being treated for a severe anxiety crisis. Richard remained at the park until 2 in the morning, refusing to go home while there was any chance that his daughters were still somewhere within Wonder World's boundaries. Detective Davis worked for 19 consecutive hours coordinating the initial response, establishing a temporary command room in the park's administrative office. On the morning of July 15th, less than 24 hours after the disappearance, the FBI was officially requested to take over the case. Special Agent Jennifer Martinez, a specialist in crimes against children, arrived from Chicago at 10 o'clock indeed the morning with a team of 6 federal investigators and advanced forensic equipment. When multiple children disappear simultaneously without traces, statistically, we're dealing with kidnapping, Agent Martinez explained during her first press conference. Our main focus is identifying anyone who had access or opportunity to take these girls without being detected. It was the beginning of an investigation that would mobilize federal resources for 3 consecutive years and become one of the most frustrating cases in Martinez's career. Wonder World Amusement Park remained closed for 6 days, while federal investigators transformed the family entertainment venue into an active crime scene. They found absolutely nothing that explained how 2 8-year-old girls could have disappeared without leaving a single trace. The years that followed the disappearance of Sarah Thompson and Emily Rodriguez were marked by a particular agony that only families of missing children can understand. The torture of living between hope and despair, between the need to move forward and the impossibility of accepting the unacceptable. Margaret Thompson never returned to teaching. After 3 months of medical leave, she requested retirement due to emotional disability at only 32 years old. I couldn't look at other 8-year-old children without seeing Sarah and Emily, she explained years later. Every laugh on the school playground reminded me of my girls. Every small hand I held reminded me of what it felt like to hold their hands. Margaret spent the first 5 years after the disappearance visiting psychics, private investigators, and anyone who claimed to have information about her daughters. Richard Thompson kept his job at the mechanic shop, but his colleagues noticed a profound change in his personality. The man who was once known for his easy laughter and jokes during lunch became quiet and intensely focused on work. Richard buried himself in work as a way to survive, said his supervisor, Mike Anderson. He arrived an hour early and left an hour late every day. It was as if physical work was the only thing that kept his sanity. The couple never had other children. "How do you replace half of your soul?" Margaret asked during an interview in 1995. Sarah and Emily weren't just our daughters. They were our reason for existing. The idea of trying to replace them seemed like a betrayal of their memory. The twins' room was kept exactly as it was on July 14, 1990. Beds made, toys organized, clean clothes folded in closets, waiting for a return that would never come. The official investigation continued active for 3 complete years. Agent Jennifer Martinez and her FBI team followed 1,247 different leads, from anonymous phone calls to reported sightings in 23 different states. They investigated 156 current and former Wonderworld employees, subjecting 34 of them to polygraph tests. All registered sex offenders within a 300-kilometer radius were interrogated and had their alibis meticulously verified. One of the most persistent theories involved a Wonderworld employee who had been fired in March 1990. James Peterson, 45 years old, had been dismissed for inappropriate behavior with child visitors. Specifically, he had been caught several times trying to talk to little girls away from their parents. Peterson had detailed knowledge of the park's security systems and knew how to move through maintenance areas without being detected. Unfortunately, Peterson had a solid alibi for July 14th. He was at an alcoholism rehabilitation clinic in Minnesota, with medical records that confirmed his presence throughout the entire weekend. In 1993, 3 years after the disappearance, the case was transferred to the FBI's cold case status. Agent Martinez was reassigned to other cases, but she never forgot Sarah and Emily. They were the case that taught me that not all mysteries can be solved, she reflected in 2010. Sometimes people simply disappear, and no matter how many resources you dedicate, no matter how meticulous you are, some answers remain out of reach. The Cedar Falls community was deeply impacted by the case. Wonderworld Amusement Park, which had been the city's pride since 1975, never fully recovered from the association with the disappearance. Visitor attendance decreased 60% in the first year after the incident and continued declining gradually during the following decade. People associated the park with tragedy, explained former Mayor John Williams. Families who used to come regularly began avoiding the place, and who can blame them? The case generated significant changes in amusement park security protocols across the country. The International Association of Amusement Parks and Attractions implemented new mandatory standards for security camera systems, lockdown procedures, and employee training for emergency situations involving lost children. The Thompson Protocol, as it became informally known, required all employees to receive annual training on identifying suspicious behaviors and rapid response procedures. In 2000, 10 years after the disappearance, the case gained national attention again when it was featured on the program, America's Most Wanted. The episode generated more than 400 calls from viewers, including 27 supposed sightings of the twins, now 18 years old. Each lead was meticulously investigated, but none led to concrete results. One of the most promising calls came from a woman in Oregon who claimed to have seen 2 identical young women working at a local restaurant. But subsequent verifications revealed that the women were local sisters with no connection to the case. Richard and Margaret Thompson divorced amicably in 2005, 15 years after the disappearance. "We loved each other, but our pain was too great to be shared," Margaret explained. "Each of us dealt with the loss differently, and eventually those differences became insurmountable." Richard moved to Phoenix, Arizona, where he worked as a mechanic until his retirement. Margaret remained in Cedar Falls, becoming an active volunteer in organizations dedicated to families of missing children. Wonderworld began facing serious financial difficulties starting in 2008. The economic recession, combined with the park's tarnished reputation and competition from more modern entertainment, forced management to significantly reduce operations. In 2010, after 35 years of operation, Wonderworld Amusement Park permanently closed its doors. "It was the end of an era," said the last general manager, Robert Chen. The park never managed to escape the shadow of 1990. For 13 years after closure, the former Wonderworld Amusement Park remained as a ghostly reminder of happier days. Metal structures rusted under rain and snow, Vegetation began to reclaim the paved territory, and the site became a melancholic symbol of abandoned dreams. The city of Cedar Falls tried several times to find developers interested in the 40-hectare lot, but the site's reputation and demolition costs discouraged potential buyers. In January 2023, Riverside Development Corporation finally acquired the property with plans to build a luxury residential complex. The Cedar Falls Commons project would include 180 housing units, a small shopping center, and green areas where roller coasters and carousels once stood. The first phase of development required complete demolition of all existing structures and removal of buried concrete foundations. Christopher Jones, a 52-year-old caretaker who had worked at Wonderworld for 8 years before its closure, was hired by Riverside Development to supervise the demolition process. Christopher knew every inch of the old park, and his experience would be valuable for identifying underground systems, buried fuel tanks, and other infrastructure that needed to be carefully removed. The morning of May 15, 2023 was clear and cool, with a temperature of 16 degrees Celsius, ideal conditions for heavy demolition work. Christopher had arrived at the site at 6:30 in the morning to meet with the excavator operator team and coordinate the removal of foundations from the old Thunder Coaster, the roller coaster where the Thompson twins had planned to ride on that fateful July day in 1990. At 9:45 in the morning, the excavator operated by Miguel Santos hit something unexpected at approximately 1 meter and 80 centimeters deep. I was removing broken concrete when the machine hit something that shouldn't have been there, Miguel explained later. It wasn't rock. It wasn't more concrete. It was something different. Christopher was called to examine the obstacle and determine how to proceed. What Christopher saw at the bottom of the excavation made his blood freeze instantly. Partially exposed by the excavator was what clearly appeared to be a small suitcase, the type used for weekend trips. The suitcase was severely deteriorated after 33 years in the ground, but was still recognizable. Even more disturbing, Christopher could see what appeared to be fragments of colored fabric emerging from the earth around the suitcase. "Stop everything immediately," Christopher ordered the demolition crew. His hands were shaking as he grabbed his cell phone to call the police. As a former Wonderworld employee, Christopher knew exactly where they were. Approximately 60 meters from the location where Sarah Thompson and Emily Rodriguez were last seen on July 14, 1990. The first police unit arrived at the scene at 10:15 in the morning. Detective Sergeant Michael Davis, son of Detective Linda Davis, who had worked on the original case, took initial coordination of the scene. "My mother told me about this case hundreds of times during my childhood," he said later. "When I received the call about a discovery at the old Wonderworld, I immediately knew what it was about." At 11 o'clock, the area was isolated as an active crime scene. The State Forensic Investigation Team arrived at 1:30 in the afternoon, followed by the coroner and forensic anthropology specialists from the University of Iowa. Dr. Patricia Williams, a forensic anthropologist with 25 years of experience, took supervision of the meticulous excavation of the site. Based on the position and condition of materials found, it's evident that this site was an intentional grave, Dr. Williams explained to the investigative team. The depth of 1 meter and 80 centimeters, the presence of a suitcase as a container, and the specific location suggest deliberate planning, not casual disposal. The careful excavation revealed remains that were consistent with 2 small children, along with clothing fragments that matched descriptions of the garments Sarah and Emily were wearing on the day of their disappearance. Identity confirmation came through dental records that had been meticulously preserved by the Thompson family for 33 years. On May 18, 2023, 3 days after the initial discovery, forensic analysis officially confirmed that the remains found were those of Sarah Thompson and Emily Rodriguez. The emotional impact of the discovery reverberated throughout the entire Cedar Falls community. Margaret Thompson, now 65 years old, received the news at her home on Maple Street, the same house where she had raised the twins 3 decades before. For 33 years, part of me hoped they would show up at my door, she said through tears. Now, finally, I can stop waiting and truly begin the grieving process. Richard Thompson, contacted in Phoenix, flew immediately to Cedar Falls. It was the first time he had returned to the city since his divorce in 2005. I always knew in my heart that they were dead, he said at an emotional press conference. But knowing and having confirmation are two completely different things. At least now, we know where they are. The discovery instantly transformed the missing persons case into a double homicide investigation. Detective Sergeant Michael Davis coordinated the formation of a task force that included FBI investigators, state forensic specialists, and retired veterans who had worked on the original case. After 33 years, the search for answers about what happened to Sarah Thompson and Emily Rodriguez was just beginning. The forensic analysis of Sarah Thompson and Emily Rodriguez's remains revealed details that fundamentally transformed understanding of the case. Dr. Patricia Williams and her team worked for 8 weeks to extract all possible information from the remains and associated evidence, using technologies that didn't exist in 1990. Examination of the bones revealed that both girls had suffered severe cranial trauma, consistent with blunt force blows. Based on fracture patterns and the absence of healing signs, the injuries were fatal and occurred close to the time of death, Dr. Williams explained in her final report. The nature of the injuries suggests use of a heavy object, possibly a maintenance tool or similar equipment. The exact location of the grave provided the most significant clue about the perpetrator's identity. The site was directly under what had been a restricted maintenance area, accessible only to employees with special keys. More importantly, construction records from 1989 revealed that a new sewer line had been installed in that exact area in April 1990, only 3 months before the girls' disappearance. Detective Sergeant Michael Davis and his task force focused on the maintenance crew that had worked on that construction project. Of the 7 employees involved, only one was still alive in 2023. Harold Pierce, 73 years old, who had worked as maintenance supervisor at Wonderworld from 1985 to 1995. Pierce had been briefly interviewed during the original 1990 investigation, but was never considered a serious suspect. When confronted with the new evidence, Pierce initially denied any involvement. However, analysis of work records from July 1990 revealed that he had requested use of excavation equipment for emergency sewer system repairs on the afternoon of July 14th, exactly the day of the disappearance. Pierce was the only employee authorized to access that specific area without supervision. The investigation revealed a disturbing pattern in Pierce's history. Police records showed that he had been investigated for inappropriate behavior with minors on 3 separate occasions between 1987 and 1993, although he was never formally charged due to lack of conclusive evidence. Former co-workers reported that Pierce frequently showed excessive interest in families with small children who visited the park. Harold always knew when there were school groups or families with twins visiting the park, said Robert Chen, Pierce's former supervisor. He memorized schedules and frequently appeared in areas where he shouldn't have been working. At the time, we thought he was just overly friendly, but looking back, the behavior was clearly predatory. Under increasing pressure, and confronted with irrefutable physical evidence, Pierce finally confessed on June 3, 2023. He admitted to luring Sarah and Emily to the maintenance area with promises to show them how the park machines worked when they were returning from the bathroom. When the girls resisted his sexual advances, Pierce fatally assaulted them with a heavy wrench he carried as part of his work tools. Pierce revealed that he had buried the bodies that same night, using park excavation equipment and taking advantage of his knowledge of underground infrastructure. He specifically chose the location because he knew future construction would be unlikely due to proximity to existing sewer lines. "I thought they would never be found," Pierce said during his interrogation. "That area was considered off-limits for development." The confession brought simultaneous relief and horror to the Thompson families. Margaret Thompson expressed conflicted feelings. "I'm grateful to finally know the truth, but the reality of how my girls suffered is almost unbearable. At least now, I know they didn't spend years in captivity. Their agony was brief." Harold Pierce was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder on June 10, 2023. Due to his advanced age and health problems, he was deemed unfit for trial. Pierce died of heart failure on August 15, 2023, only 2 months after his confession, taking with him the most specific details of his crimes. The discovery led to a complete reevaluation of similar unsolved cases in Iowa and neighboring states. Investigators are now examining records of other amusement parks where Pierce worked before and after his time at Wonderworld, looking for possible connections to unsolved child disappearances. In September 2023, Sarah Thompson and Emily Rodriguez were finally buried at Cedar Falls Memorial Cemetery, in a ceremony that attracted more than 800 people from the community. Margaret and Richard Thompson, reunited for the first time in 18 years, walked side by side behind the small coffins, offering their daughters the funeral they deserved 33 years ago. The site where Wonderworld once stood will be transformed into Cedar Falls Commons as planned, but will now include a permanent memorial for Sarah and Emily. A small green area with benches and commemorative plaques will mark approximately where the girls were found, serving as a reminder of both their lives and the importance of community vigilance in protecting children. Margaret Thompson, now 65 years old, found an unexpected way to channel her pain into purpose. She established the Sarah and Emily Foundation, dedicated to improving safety protocols at amusement parks and training employees to identify predatory behaviors. If my girls' deaths can save other children in the future, then maybe their brief passage through this world had a greater meaning. The Thompson twins' case remains as a somber reminder that predators can hide in places where we least expect to find them. After 33 years, 2 girls who went out for a day of fun finally rest in peace, and their families can, for the first time in more than 3 decades, truly begin the healing process.